Man, we doubled the size. Look at that. What you do?
We
For
sign
sale
in.
sign out there?
Singing has brought him in.
Well, I recognize everybody in here, so there's no newbies. So everybody knows how we do business here, right? So we have the cheat sheets, and if they say,
We don't need to talk about Genesis?
I noticed that some of them had Colossians on them. I don't know how they got Colossians on half the sheets, but somehow there were Colossians on them. And, hey, still don't see any really newbies. Everybody's been in these classes. We always sing a song. If you miss a song, if you know there's a song sheet. It's always at the front. You can bring up topics of theology or doctrine, but we don't talk theology and doctrine. We talk history and linguistics and language and culture. So the point is not, I try not to give any opinions. You can give all the opinions you want, but remember, if we start talking about opinions, we're putting our toe in the pool of theology. Or
Lutherans don't dance, is what you're saying?
they may be dancing, but you know what?
They ain't swinging.
They ain't swinging? We'd be trying to be swinging. Well, we'd be trying to talk about, like I said, most people, well, the way I approach this, and the way I've approached all the classes, is, don't you care what's written in Romans? Romans was written in King James, right? King James English. No? Then it was written in Latin? Oh, what was it written in? It's in Greek. So if it's in Greek, then wouldn't it be a good idea to study it in Greek? Because if we study it in Greek, then we might be able to understand some of the nuances of the language. And I know I may see some new faces, but if you have new faces, if you're new face, this class, there's always a cheat sheet, and this is a cheat sheet. We always sing a song, we sing in. It's too late, we pass the song. It's a good thing I forgot my guitar anyway. Well, I finally got it. But note sheets. So I used to call them gouge, but I wasn't supposed to call them gouge anymore. I'm a retired military, so retired militarism sometimes pop out. Can't help it. Sorry. But I should probably explain this. A lot of you guys already know this, but I have peculiar hobbies, and two of my peculiar hobbies are dead languages, specifically Anglo-Saxon and not Koine Greek, but Athenian Greek, ancient Athenian Greek. So Koine Greek is universal Greek. It's not necessarily just biblical Greek. There's a lot of stuff written in Koine Greek. But what I do is I assume that Paul and the writers of the New Testament documents, and by the way, I use the word New Testament documents all the time, I'll explain in a second, wrote in the best Greek they knew. That is Athenian Greek. I also assume in the class that the Greek that we're talking about is classical Greek. The reason I say that is because, for example, I give you Strong's and Vine's definitions. I also supplement them with Woodhouse. And if you're not familiar with Woodhouse, Strong's and Vine's is typical Koine Greek, biblical, what we call biblical Greek. It's not really biblical, it's universal Greek from the period approximately past the classical period, the neoclassical period. Let me see it. Let me put a date on this. About 200 BC to maybe 200 BC to maybe 200 AD or so. That's the Koine Greek period. Before that's classical Greek, Athenian Greek. But the assumption is that the writers of the New Testament were writing the best Greek possible and would not put new meanings. Do you guys, when you write, are you putting new meanings on words? No. You take the meanings as they are. So when we talk about ecclesia, we're talking about an Athenian word. When we talk about agape, we're talking about an Athenian word. Also, from the universal Greek period, the Koine period, the words did not change that much. However, what you find is, because we've spent 2,000 years of theological thinking, what do you think we've done to the words? We put our own values on them. And so what I try to do in these classes is purposely look at the history, the culture of the times, and I'll explain. That's what this whole first introductory class is about. And then how do we look at the Greek? Because that's what we're most interested in. Now, back, why do I call it New Testament, Old Testament documents? Because this is my collection. I have a couple of them here. A couple of collections of New Testament documents. This is a collection of New Testament documents. It has to be interlinear Greek, English, which is pretty helpful. And this is a New English translation, which is a very helpful document. But this is my collection. Because if you put this on your desk at work, and it says it's a collection, and you tell people it's a collection of New Testament, Old Testament documents, who can complain, right? But if you put a collection of the Holy Bible on your desk at work, what do people say? Right? You get it? See? So if we keep things in a non-theological, kind of a non-doctrinal kind of thing, how can you talk to people at work? How can you talk to people about things that we may say talk about in this class? It's non-threatening, right? If it's history and culture and language, how threatening can that be? See? If you're talking about ancient documents, how threatening can that be? So that's the reason I try to use these terms, and for example, I try not to use the word, we're not talking about stories. What are we talking about? Histories. Histories. You know, I kind of, one of my pet peeves is when I'm a historian. So when you talk about histories, we talk about histories. When we talk about stories, you know, I write novels. They're stories. Although they incorporate a lot of history. Still, they're novels. But we're not talking about novels, we're talking about history. And next week, what we'll get into is historical veracity. Historical veracity, and I hope that when you went to college or when you went to high school, probably not in high school, although they should, when you go to college, what you should do is prove the text of all the ancient documents you use. So we're going to study Romans. And if you study Romans, you have to do what? Prove whether it's a verifiable, if it has veracity as a historical document. Because if it doesn't have veracity as a historical document, what should we study it as? A novel or a story or literature, right? Now you can do that. That's not a problem. You can do that. However, I'll make an assertion this week and then we'll prove it next week. The assertion is that Romans is a good historical document. And then I'll prove it next week. If you haven't, many of you have been in my class before, so you know how this goes. But like I said, every professor, everyone who's teaching you a class in history should prove the veracity of the historical documents. Period. If they don't, I'm not sure what kind of historian they are. But in any case, I always like to have Greek words of the day, and I have them. I'm sorry they're not as bright or light as I'd like them to be. I need to recheck my, thanks Judy for the pens. She supplies me my pens. Got a whole bunch of them, so I need to go back through them. What I try to do is focus words that are specific in the document that we're going to look at, and also in the specific verses or sentences that we're going to look at. And these are Greek, so if you can't read them, that's okay. They're Greek. Sometimes I've given out a Greek alphabet compared to U.S. or U.S. sounds. Remember, we're doing transliteration, so we're making the sounds sound correctly. This in Greek is a ho, D-O. It's a kind of a U-ish sound, and what you got to realize too, there are 4 ways to pronounce ancient Greek. So if you've been to seminary and you've heard there's what we call classical, there's pre-Erasmunsian, there's post-Erasmunsian, and there's modern. Those are the 4 different ways to pronounce Greek. So if you hear me pronouncing something the way you haven't heard it pronounced, don't worry, I'm mixing up one of the 4. No, I try to use classical Greek form, okay? That's what you typically hear at university, not at seminary. Seminary tends to use post-Erasmunsian, I believe. But in any case, so this word is hodos. Hodos. Hodos means way. Literally, it means a road. Why is the word hodos so important? Kin hodos. Why is kin hodos so important? Tin hodos. Tin literally in Greek, okay, it's an article form, means the way.
Because the Christians were first called Teen Hodos in Antioch.
Actually, and that's not incorrect, however, the Christians, well, those groups that we call Christians today called themselves Teen Hodos. Because they were what? They were a sect of Judaism. There are 5 sects of Judaism. We'll talk about in the third lesson, specific, third session. So there are, you guys know who they are, right? Who are the 5? Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, Zealots, and Teen Hodos. There are 2 others that are mentioned by Origen, but nobody can find them in the past. I think they're Meletians and Parasian or whatever. Anyway, there's no other references in historical literature to the other 2. So some say there are 7, but that's because of Origen. But I don't agree with Origen necessarily. So there are the 5 sects of Judaism. One of them is Teen Hodos. Who call them Christians? The Greeks. The Greeks call them Christians. And by the way, keep that in your brain because this is an important focus of what we're going to talk about in Romans. We'll get to that too. These are pretty easy ones. This is the Christianos. Christianos. Anybody want to take a guess what that is? Christianos. Christians, yes. Amazing how that works, right? Christianos. I'll mention this very quickly. Why were they called Christianos?
Followers of Christ.
Well, as I recall, they used names that followed a particular leader or a particular head of a tribe or whatever it is. They had a single person, so they identified the group with that person.
We are going to look at this concept, mysterion. Mysterion is the most important concept in the New Testament documents. Now, if you've gone to, I don't know if they're teaching it much in seminary, but I know for a fact they're teaching this finally at the university level. I've talked to a couple of students. They actually have classes in mysterion. You can't read the New Testament without, if you know anything about Greek, you can't read the New Testament without talking about mysterion. Because the reason they called the early Christians instead of Teen Hodos is because in mysterion, you always called your mysterion after the name of your god or leader. So the mysterion of Pythagoras, the mysterion of Osiris, the mysterion of Mithras, these mysterions. And so you say, what is a mysterion? I need to talk about that, I guess, really quickly. We'll get into that. But mysterions, you always name them after the leader. Therefore, the Greeks called Teen Hodos
After the leader.
after Christ, Christianos. So that's where the name came from. Let me do a quick segue because this is very critical to our understanding. We're beginning a look at culture. What is the culture of this world? The Greco-Hebraic Roman culture. What is that culture? Specifically Greco and Roman.
Pagan.
Pagan. They are pagan. And most specifically, they are pantheonic pagan. Pantheonic pagan. You say, what's the difference? Well, all religions start with animism. Animism. What's animism?
Spirits in
There's
an
a force within us.
Spirits in,
Like the force fingers.
it's not fair to say inanimate objects. Spirits in any object that shows some kind of natural force. So,
wind.
wind, right. Wind, thunderstorms, fire, living things, plants, trees, right? They all start with, what's that?
Sun and moon.
Sun and moon, exactly. Anything that shows, movement, right? Movement and power. And so, animism is where everyone starts. By the way, where did Abraham start? What did he worship? Ur of Chaldees? What did Ur of Chaldees worship? Remember, Abraham was from the Ur of Chaldees. What did they worship? They worshiped the moon. They worshiped more than the moon because they were animists. What makes you move from an animist to a pantheonic pagan? And by the way, what is a pantheonic pagan? Anybody want to take a venture? What's a pantheonic pagan?
More than one God?
Well, animists say there's gods in everything, but they're not necessarily inanimate, but they're objects that have natural force. So plants and things like that. But as something happens in your culture, this is all culturally based, you now have to start thinking in different terms. What forces you to think in different terms?
Cause and effect, it didn't happen.
Language?
Language, you become what?
Literate.
Literate. Let me give you an example. You've ever studied, I don't know if you've studied anthropology, but when they go into study, for example, tribes, native tribes that are not literate. Literate means you can read and write. So tribes that don't have any language, do not have any reading language, can't read and write. The question, one of the favorite questions to ask in the test is, what about a bear? And the answer from an animist is, the bear that my uncle saw 10 years ago that went into his tent or his house. Why? Or how about this? When I say chair, what do you imagine in your mind?
Piece of furniture
No, you don't.
in the English.
What do you imagine?
C-H-A-I-R.
You imagine C-H-A-I-R. You do not imagine a specific chair, unless you're an animist. Because when I say the word chair to an animist, what do they imagine?
The bear that went into their uncle's tent.
Their chair. Their uncle's chair. Do you see this? Because why? Why the difference?
There is a force within it of some nature.
Well, if you don't have language, what can you only think in?
Pictures.
Pictures.
Images.
Images. And it has to be one or the other, right? But if you have language, suddenly I can think in terms of bunches of chairs, because chairs can come in lots of forms, right? This is a famous Greek argument. Now, the third step in religion. When I invent something, I make the third step in religion. Anybody remember what that is? Philosophy makes me move into mysterion. And the reason is that philosophy, in animism, I believe that there are spirits in everything. And I become literate, and I start to realize that, oh, I need a god of love, Aphrodite. I need a god of metallurgy, Hephaestus. I need a god of music, Apollo. I need a god of all these civilized things because now I have words for them, right? Can you have a word for love if you're an animist, if you're not literate? No, you can't. Because love, can I picture love in my brain? You can picture being loving because it's a verb, right? But I can't picture love in my brain. So I have to be literate to understand something as complex as love. So when I start developing philosophy, I start to recognize the fact that, oh my goodness, maybe the forces of the world are not caused by spirits or the gods. And so now I am confronted with something very important, that maybe the world isn't quite the same. Now there's one group that didn't follow this path. What group is that?
Jews.
The Jews did. For some reason, old Abraham, and I write about it in my book, Egypt, but you know, we're not sure exactly why, but at some point, old Abraham and his buds were monotheistic and found the God of the universe. Now, whether that's a miracle, which is theological, right, or it's what? Why they wouldn't follow the whole train of the rest of the world. Very interesting, isn't it? But they became monotheistic. And of course, Christians, Teen Hodos, that is, following in the footsteps as a Jewish sect, were monotheistic. It's very interesting because monotheism one of the steps in Mysterion is what? You become well, I'll take that back. You don't necessarily become monotheistic, but you focus your attention on a singular God. That's one of the characteristics of Mysterion. Is you may still be a pantheonic pagan, but you focus on a singular God, which means you're becoming monotheistic. And then the final one is Gnosticism. Gnosticism. By the way, Christianity ushered in the last realm of monotheism, of Gnosticism. Gnosticism, you basically become Gnostic when you recognize, when you begin to explore science. What's really funny is, does Christianity fit into any of these? No, they don't. Judaism doesn't either. Every other religion does. It's very interesting because Muslim is a Mysterion. It's very interesting that, for example, we'll talk more about Mysterion. Mysterion is very important. One of the main characteristics of Mysterion is if you have initiation rites in secret. That is the characteristic. So any religion that you can imagine that has initiation rites in secret, that is a Mysterion. Gnosticism means that you find salvation based in knowledge. And so if you're knowledge-based, in other words, you have to do something through knowledge to find God or find salvation, that's Gnosticism. Anybody want to venture a guess what really strong Gnostic religions are around? Half of modern Christianity seems Gnostic to me, but for example, Buddhism, right? Buddhism, enlightenment, that's right. Anytime you're seeking enlightenment, Taoism, Taoism,
Yeah, Scientology.
Scientology, Mormonism is a Mysterion. You can place a whole lot of religious things into the buckets, based in characteristics. So, very interesting. And somebody asked me, does that mean that all the Greek fraternities and sororities are Mysterions? And the answer is, yes, they are. Pretty funny. But in any case, this is important because this puts the basis for the culture. Remember, what culture do we live in? What is our culture? Well, if I want to read something, I read something. I'm going to talk about reading. It's very important stuff for us to understand about how the ancients read documents. We don't do it though. Let's look at the rest of these words very quickly. C-H-A-R-I-S, charis. Charis, chario, is a Greek greeting, means graciousness. We usually translate this word grace. But in Greek, in a Greek sense, this is a word of greeting. It means graciousness. Very much simpler than a theological meaning to us. We'll get to know a lot more of these words. A-P-O-S-T-O, they're right there, C-H-O-S. No, that's not it. That's an L. Apostolos.
Yeah.
Apostolos. Apostolos. And, in Greek words, what you find is Greek words are formed very differently than, they're more like English words. They have suffixes and prefixes. That's why I put it in here for you. Apollos is a sacred word specifically. It means from apo, which means off, and stoloche, which means, let's see, I got there here, literally to stand out as a delegate. But the problem is that stoloche means a delegate from the gods. So basically, this is off, a delegate from the gods. It's a sacred word in Greek. Not applied to humans. Not applied to humans in classical Greek. Whoa. See, A-G-I-O-I-S. Is that right? This is what I got. What did I put in here? Hagios. Hagios. Very important word. Yeah, it should. Yeah, H-A sound. And there's one that I missed here. Hagios. Hagios is a sacred word too. The word hagios in English, the word hag comes from hagios. But this is a word we translate almost all the time as saint, saint. Now how does that fit? Hagios. Hagios being a sacred word. What's a hagios in Greek? Give me an example of a hagios in Greek. Which, by the way, a hagios is also an apostolos. Anybody give me an example of a hagios in Greek? Medusa, the sirens, the sphinx are hagios. They're also apostolos. They are messengers from the gods. They're called specifically, in our thinking, demigods. And yet this word is used exclusively in the New Testament documents for saints. Now, riddle me this. If you're Paul, and you're writing to the first century Greeks, because that's what he's writing to, right? He's writing to first century Greeks and people who speak Greek. Would he use a word that they could not understand within its context? Never. There's no way. Would you write a word, for example, you're writing a letter to your friends in another church, let's say, and you write, you demigod hags that are also representatives or messengers from the gods. Would you address them that way in English? No. Do you think Paul's using code language? Well, let's look at this last word. This one we also find in the text that I'd like to get today. I don't know if we will have time to. This is A-G-A-P-E-T-O-I-S. Agapetoi. No, that's French. Agapetos. Agapetos, it comes from agape. And everybody knows what agape is, right? Which kind?
God's unconditional love of the gods.
Okay. Well, in English, I got one word. How many words do I have in Greek?
3 at least.
I haven't given you all of them. Usually in a class, usually the introductory class or some class, I'll give you all the words. There's 8 to 10 for love and light in Greek, okay? Because the Greek's very specific. Greek language, this is the thing we have to learn about Greek. Greek is probably the most absolute concrete language you will ever know, period. English is not. English is euphemistically based. Very euphemistically based. Very figure of speech based. Where Greek is not. Greek is concrete. When a Greek says rip your arm off, he means rip your arm off. There are some figures of speech in Greek. But literally, the Greeks, for example, the Greek poetry. A Greek might write, it was a dark and stormy night. Or in English speaking, what would we might write? Oh, the clouds were rolling across the skies and they were dark and filled with water and they dropped, right? Because in English, what do we like? Euphemism, flowery, description, right? Greek is not that way. So in Greek, we find very specific words with very specific meanings. Agape means the love of the gods. Now I know this is going to be a difficult thing. What we have to do, and this is what I want to do with you and for you, we're going to take off our modern 21st century English-speaking blinders. And we're going to put on some other blinders. These blinders are going to be first century Greco-Hebraic blinders. Because what do we want to see this world? How do we want to see this world? The way Paul saw it. Because, by the way, if we see it the way Paul saw it and we understand the Greek words that he uses, then what can we do?
We can understand what he meant.
We can understand the world that he's trying to describe to us. Because, right, I'm going to prove to you that Romans is historical. If Romans is historical, then that means what is it chock full of?
History.
History! That's what we want, right? We want to know what happened. Of course, in our English minds, we want to know what happened. We want a book this thick, right? Gore Vidal. Right? The Greeks don't think that way. That's not Greco thinking. We've got to get into the Greek thinking, so we'll get there. In any case, these are great words because these represent specifically what I'm talking about. And I know it's going to be hard at first to understand exactly what Paul is doing and what the early Christians are doing, the Teen Hodos is doing. Because they're trying to explain things that to them are very real, historically relevant, but are what to describe in Greek. Very difficult to describe in Greek. Because Paul and the early Christian writers, early Teen Hodos writers, specifically chose words that have very specific Greek meanings. Sacred Greek words that we don't find in other contexts. When I say other contexts, when you're writing sacred Greek, when you're writing about sacred Greek, what do you think you're writing about? The gods. And so what has happened is in these New Testament documents, we find words that generally are applied only to Greek gods being placed in a context describing human beings, describing human interactions, and describing the way that they're bringing a message. Very interesting stuff. I also want to note, I showed it on your note sheet. If you remember when we studied Colossians, how many allusions to Old Testament documents were in Colossians? 0. There were a few allusions to apocryphal documents, but no quotes from the Old Testament. I think there were 3 allusions to the Old Testament, which would imply, okay, if I'm writing a document and I have a lot of quotes or allusions to the Old Testament, who am I writing to?
Jews.
Jews. On the other hand, and this, if you missed your apocryphal class, I'm sorry, we'll just have to fill you in a little bit. If I'm writing to Jewish people in this century, well, first of all,
Give me a Jewish argument there.
First of all right, I know this is going to blow your brains, as some people never heard this. What language did Jesus Christ primarily speak?
Greek.
Now we know he knew Hebrew. He probably knew Aramaic, because he learned it from his mother's lap. But every quote that he quotes is in Greek except what? We heard an example today in the sermon in the thing. Epaphatha is Aramaic for open. Now, okay. If I'm sitting here in English and you're copying my things and I suddenly break into German, which I could, okay, or Anglo-Saxon or Greek, what are you going to do? Not right. Let's say that you're able to continue writing, okay? So if I'm speaking in English and all of a sudden I hit a foreign word, what do? You write the foreign word because you're quoting me, right? So if Jesus is speaking and all of a sudden you quote him in a foreign word like Aramaic, what does that mean?
Different word than what, different language than what
It's the
Jesus
exception
used.
used.
It's the exception. So what did Jesus Christ have to speak? Greek. If you conclude that the Gospels are history, then what language did Jesus Christ speak? Greek. Now, if you want to take another conclusion, you have to talk to somebody else. But the big deal is, people seem to miss this point. Because it's quite obvious that Jesus is speaking Greek to everybody. He didn't speak Aramaic, and all of a sudden somebody translated his words into Greek, and then some of the words in Aramaic. That's kind of strange, don't you think? Very interesting, because we need to look at that, which means that Jesus Christ was a, what? Greek thinker and speaker, right? So again, I'll point this to you. If we understand how Greeks in that century think, what does that tell us about understanding Christ? So I'm just using the words Christ. What's Christ? Christos is Greek, means anointed one. As opposed to Yeshua, we say Jesus, but it's not Jesus, it's Yeshua. Yeshua is Aramaic Hebrew.
Hey, Lyle, I have a question. So when did Hebrew, just remind us, when did Hebrew become a dead language? I mean, did they speak Hebrew in their homes? I knew they spoke it in the synagogue.
No, they did not speak in homes, they spoke Aramaic. Matter of fact, Hebrew became a dead language. We're not exactly sure when Hebrew became a dead language. The best guess is probably, when was the Babylonian captivity begin?
200 BC approximately.
No, about 500 to 600. I did it the wrong way, BC. Because Aramaic is a characteristic language of the Persian Empire. That's where it came from, was the Persian Empire and Babylonians. So about 500 to 600 BC, the Hebrews went to Babylon, right, in the Persian Empire, eventually because Darius defeated Babylon. And the Persians were really careful about this. This is another culture, I don't have time to get into this, but one of the ways you subjugated people is what did you prevent them from doing? Use their language. Very classical technique. The Russians did it in the modern century. It doesn't work very well, but what happened is Hebrew went underground and they still were able to read the text, but they weren't able to, they did not speak the language. They used Aramaic. And then what happened?
Alexander.
What's that?
Alexander.
Well, beyond that, the thing that happened in the Hebrew language is around 800, I'm running out of space, around 800 AD, the Masoretes, I'll get into more of this next week, but the Masoretic text, about 800 AD, the Masoretes wanted to recover the Hebrew, spoken Hebrew, because spoken Hebrew was dead. So what they did is they went to Arabic sources, and most of their stuff comes from Aramaic and Arabic sources. So we don't even know today, matter of fact, what do we not know today? How to speak YHYJ. What is that? YJYH? I can't remember. Yahweh. How to say the name of God. Nobody knows how to say the name of God. Because the Masoretes basically borrowed for Hebrew the Aramaic and the Arabic sounds for vowels. Because, okay, and this goes back to what we need to talk about. Here's what we need to talk about. Let's do the example of Greek and Hebrew. All right, when I write, I guess I'll pick another color. Maybe this will work. All right.
You have it backwards.
How about this? THQCBRWNFX. All right, you can kind of read this, maybe? That says the quick brown fox, right? This says same thing, but it's missing vowels. Hebrew has no vowels. Until about 800 AD, when the Masoretes added the vowel sounds, they added vowel pointlets to Hebrew. So then, and they used the pointlets they used were based in Arabic. So they used Arabic vowels. However, if you look at a Torah scroll today, Torah scrolls can only be written in ancient Hebrew. They have no vowel pointlets. So illegal. I didn't bring my Jewish Bible. I have a Jewish Bible that basically is, I have one with pointlets and I have one without pointlets. Okay? So this is Hebrew. Now imagine reading a whole chapter like this. Because they didn't have what? The ancient world did not have punctuation. They didn't just separate the words. Most ancient languages didn't have vowels. How do you read it?
You already knew what it said.
You memorized it. This is very, very, very critical for understanding ancient language. And when I say ancient language, we're talking about Old Testament, New Testament documents. New Testament documents as well. This is before the invention of spaces between words. It's before the invention of punctuation. It's before the invention of paragraphs. It's before the invention of any of those things. They weren't invented because they weren't needed. What you did you did not read a book in the ancient world. What you did is you went to someone who knew what the book said. Remember, this is the way it worked. First of all, let's talk about this. How much did a scroll cost in the ancient world? Any idea? It cost, this is French source, okay, French source. It was, a cost of a scroll was the equivalent of a 40-acre farm. That's the cost of a scroll. What happened when you went to the marketplace in Athens? And this is Athens. You go to Athens, and by the way, we knew they had scrolls in the marketplace. It's written about in Zeno, it's written about in Plato. So they went to the marketplace in Athens, and they bought a scroll. What came with the scroll?
Scribe.
Well, a scribe or a slave. Remember, Plato was a slave. Do you know that? Plato was a slave, and he may have done this for a living. His owner would say, here's Plato. He knows what's in this scroll. And he carries it home for you, right? So you pay as much as a 40-acre farm, a whole bunch of denarii, and you get Plato. He comes home with you, and you open the scroll. And he looks over your shoulder, and he has it memorized. But what is he able to do with those words? He's memorized them, but the words are mnemonics. They allow him to know exactly what is in the scroll, because they're mnemonics. That's the purpose of ancient language. So now he reads it to you 2 or 3 or 4 times, however long it takes you to memorize what's in the scroll. And then he goes home. You have the scroll. How many books are in the average library until Gutenberg? How many scrolls are in the average library until Gutenberg? 7. 7. As a matter of fact, why was the book invented? These are questions. You asked these questions when we were in 6th grade, right? Your 6th grade Sunday school teacher gave you the answers to why were books invented. Actually, your 6th grade teacher should have taught you why books were invented. Didn't you want to know? Why do you think they went... Okay, what do you think they had before scrolls? We have no evidence of this, but we know they had it because we have some records.
Clay tablets, rocks.
Not exactly. I'm talking about papyrus. You know, who had papyrus? The Egyptians. Egyptians had papyrus and vellum. Not so much vellum, but papyrus. And how did they do their documents before scrolls?
Little pieces of paper.
They had pieces of paper, and they put them, and this is before they invented numbering. Remember, they're like this. No vowels in hieroglyphics. And actually they're writing hieratic or whatever script. So it's anyway, hard to see. No page numbering. They just stacked the pages in a cubby or in a box. Now that's great until what happens?
The wind comes and blows it away.
Well, the servant who's carrying it goes, oops. Ah! Now you got to find somebody to put it back together, right? Or how about this? You know, the servant who's supposed to be taking care of your room, and you had it out on your desk, and she kind of tidies it up, and you suddenly can't read the story anymore, right? It's memorized, but you can't read it. This was a problem. So how they invent? What they do? They said, well, if we tie them together in a scroll, then you will never lose your place, right? You just roll them up. And so no one can mess them up. And that's how scrolls became invented. So then why did they go to books? The early books were called codexes. That's a hint. This is one of the most important things in English culture. Why do we go to books? The reason we went to books is this. How hard is it to carry a scroll? Anybody seen a Torah scroll?
Big.
Torah scroll, the first 5 books is ginormous. A scroll of Ruth is ginormous. They're hard to carry around. So somebody got this smart idea and said, hey, instead of attaching these things together, let's put them together in a book and attach them on the sides. And that way they're more compact and you won't lose the order.
You can skip to chapter 4 faster.
And you can skip forward faster. By the way, there's a hilarious German advertisement on YouTube about this, about the invention of the book from the scroll, and the guy trying to figure out, well, how do you open it? How do you start this? Oh, I see. Anyway, it's cute. In any case, you know, just think of the revolution between scrolls and books. But the reason books were invented, codex were invented, was to promulgate what? So they could carry around what?
All the letters we have from the apostles.
So they could carry basically the Gospels and the Pauline letters. The first codexes, books in the world, in the Western world anyway, were the codexes of Pauline letters and the Gospels. Because that way they wouldn't have to have in scroll form, which was really difficult.
And they may be incomplete.
But the big deal is this. The big deal is this. See, this is the thing that we get, in my opinion, we get cheated on. Because how important is it to know why books were invented? Right? Why aren't we taught that? How important is it to know why scrolls were invented? We taught, we make scrolls in kindergarten, in Sunday school, right? But isn't it more important to know why they were invented than just to make them? Anyway, sorry, I'm an engineer by profession. I mean, that's the questions I ask. Why? Yes, sir.
Now, Paul was writing to the churches. Presumably, does that mean that somebody memorized the content, went along with it to explain what it is if there was no punctuation, or how did somebody read something new?
Let me explain this. Okay, this is important. This is a great thing because this is very important culturally to understand this. I'm Paul, and I want to write a letter. Okay, no punctuation. There are vowels in Greek, so you'll get the Greek, but all this Greek is squished together. Okay, so I want to write a letter. So what I do is I hire a scribe, basically, what's it called in Greek? Gramma something. Anyway, gramma something or other. It's in the New Testament. I can't pick it out of my brain right this moment, but it's a gramma something. Basically, you hire this guy, and he's usually a slave. Usually a slave, might be an entrepreneur, but usually a slave. What he does, he comes to your house and he brings paper. He brings two things. He brings papyrus and he brings vellum. And he brings different types of inks to your house. And he says, do you want vellum or papyrus? By the way, papyrus is biblios. The word biblios means papyrus in Greek. Vellum is membranus. So he would say, you want membranus or you want biblios? Biblios is papyrus. Why? What's the difference? Cost because of what?
Material,
Because longevity. Vellum lasts a long time. Animal hide lasts a long time. Membranus will last 1,000 years. Where papyrus, you'd be lucky to get 10 years maybe out of it or whatever. So he gives you a choice. Your choice. He also gives you a choice of inks. Because why? There's more permanent India ink that came out of India or whatever, and then there's the stuff that he squished with his bare toes, on gooseberries, right? So you get a choice. You get, the more permanent types of things. And so he sits there, he says, we can do it on this, we can do it on that. Because, buying paper is hard, right? Making paper, buying paper, or vellum, right? Because there is no paper. See? So anyway, he gives you choice, and it's a very costly process because it's expensive stuff. So then what do? You tell him what to write. And he writes it in good Greek. That's his job. He writes it in good Greek, all squished like this. And then when you're finished with your letter at the end, he then does what? He reads it back to you. And he says, is this what you meant? And if you say yes, then he makes, usually there's corrections. So that first copy is toast. Then he makes you 3 copies. 3 copies. The first copy is for you. The second copy is for him. The third copy is for whoever you're sending it to. So, now, his job has just begun. Because what does he do? What is part of his deal?
Post it off and reads it.
He takes it for you. Now, you may send it with, okay, Paul was probably in Corinth when he wrote his letter to Rome. Corinth to Rome, a long ways away, right? So this poor Grammatarius, whatever. Anyway, Grammatarius, something like that. This guy, do you think he wants to go to Rome by himself? Now, who's paying for this? Paul is, the writer is. I mean, do you get this? Okay, we send a letter for $1? No. 40 something. Well, soon it'll be $1 and you can't get on Saturdays. But anyway, we send a letter for nothing and we write it on paper that costs like a penny, right? And we do it ourselves. But in this day, you're writing a letter, it may cost you thousands of bucks in equivalent. Right? A book, a scroll costs as much as a 40-acre farm. See? So a letter, how much is a letter worth? A letter is worth as much as you're paying for this guy's trip and his meals and whatever else he wants, right? His sandals on the way out. So what might you want to send with him?
Somebody to make sure he gets there.
Somebody to make sure he gets there, number one, and doesn't take your money and go, sayonara, right? I mean, this happened a lot in the ancient world, right? You're sending a letter to Rome, and the guy gets halfway there and says, well, this is painful, I'm going home. See? Did you deliver the letter? Yeah, I did. You know, who's going to know, right? You didn't get a letter back. Well, because it cost so much, who's going to send a letter back? You know what I'm saying? So anyway, and your mother said, please write. In any case. So,
Send money.
so you would send somebody with this guy, and so you're making a trip to Rome, and when he gets to Rome, what he would do, usually when you sent letters, okay, unless you're like the Roman government, you're not sending letters to just one guy or one gal. You're sending letters to groups of people, or otherwise you wouldn't be writing them. So he gets there, and now what does he do? He reads the letter. And what do the people do there? There are certain people who then memorize what's in the letter, because then they get their copy. See this? So, you know, then there are 3 copies of every letter. We know this. I have some quotes. I'm not going to get to them today. Maybe we'll talk about it next week. But there's quotes in the New Testament documents that are quite obvious. Paul talking about bringing my biblion, my collection. A biblion is not a collection. He talks about getting the biblion, meaning my papyrus sheets, which probably indicates what was he talking about? His letters. He also talks about his membranus. What do you think would be on a membranus? Well,
High level.
no, it's probably his Torah scrolls. Torah scrolls. New Testament, guys, I'll talk about it next week, big time. New Testament documents were never considered scripture until when? Reformation. They were always considered by the church as history. Period. Dot. Period. Yes, ma'am.
Now, you said there made 2 copies. One was mine, one belonged to the scribe, and one to the recipient. What use did the scribe? What purpose would the scribe have once he delivered his letter and gotten someone else to memorize it? Then why did he want that copy for himself?
Theoretically, when he went to the recipient and they would sign the fact, you know, it's like a signature thing, they would put their red X on it or say, you know, and there would be some kind of proving thing that he would be able to take that back and he would keep it in his records, and it was a record that he didn't go halfway to Rome and decide to go visit his mother in Corinth for the next week. See, so it was, you know,
Receipt for services rendered.
it's basically it's a receipt and also proof that he did it. You know,
Well, also
in delivery.
a reference in case, so we wouldn't have to do it again.
Remember, okay, in our minds, look, in our minds, burn it, throw it away, who cares? It's what, maybe $1.50, right, used? We don't care, because they're so ubiquitous. In the ancient world, a document was a sacred thing. I don't care whether it's a sacred document or not. It was a very valuable thing. It's something that was not in just anyone could have or use or whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now, in some of Paul's letters, he encourages them to share the letter with another congregation. And so these letters are obviously passed around. Do they make new copies so that, like, if it was going to Ephesus, that the Ephesians would have their copy and the Corinthians would retain their own?
Yes, and bingo, there, and I'll probably get more into this next week when we talk about it, but, okay. All right, I'm gonna rock and roll some more. I'll bring a copy of the majority text next week. But you have to realize that we're gonna talk, there's about 779 copies of Romans. There's about 779 copies in Greek of all the Pauline letters. Every copy is slightly different. Every copy is slightly different. And so we have what's called the majority text. The majority text is where we have shown the differences and corrections within the text, and it's considered the holy grail of all the textual comparisons. And so when I talk about what document am I using, I am using the majority text of the Greek for our documents. And whenever I have a chance, I'll try to express, why there are differences between the texts. But you have to realize this. There's nothing, I would argue there's nothing, and we'll talk about this next week, that would make any theological or huge doctrinal differences between the texts. But there are differences. And so we have to recognize that. And it's due to what you said. Each of the groups, when they got their letters, the Ephesians would say, hey, could you guys in Corinth make us a copy? Or Tarsus would say, hey, could you make us a copy? Or these guys, and so they were making copies, and sometimes the copies weren't as perfect as as we would like. There's reasons for other stuff too. We'll talk about this next week. We'll get into this. We'll look at the veracity of the text. There's so much to look in Romans. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray that you look after us through this week. Look after our families and give us, bring us all back safely. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.